Our final discussion before the afternoon tea break is on supply chain considerations, where we have a diverse panel embedded into the battery supply chain. The panel, and I would like the panellists to make their way to their position on the stage, please. Yeah. The panel will be led by Lee Staines, who, following a career with some of the heavyweights of the international resources sector, Lee is currently industry professor at the UQ Sustainable Minerals Institute, where she is supporting the commercialisation of research for the energy transition. Lee is also director of the Queensland Manufacturing Institute and a passionate advocate for the future-proofing Australian manufacturing. We look forward to her driving this supply chain discussion. Thank you, Lee.
Good afternoon. We've had a bit of Mythbusters for the first session, and then I was thinking, what's the second one with skills? It was Australia Has Talent. So what is us? I think we're supply chain, so we must be the block. You know, unrealistic timeframes of getting really difficult things done, which makes me Scotty Cam. But let me do a quick introduction to our panellists, because we're the speed panel today. So we've got Nick Whebell in the middle here, who is actually the business development manager at Cleveland Bay Chemical Company up in Townsville, which already had a shout out this morning. We've got Ursula on the end here, who is with SLR Consulting, and she's the Queensland planning team lead. And they cover everything from the resources end of the value chain right through to manufacturing. And we've heard about the challenges with permits and approvals today. And right next to me, we've got Dr. Nagesh Shukla, who's the Associate Professor and Lead for Logistics and Supply Chain Management at Griffith Uni. So he's our resident specialist today. But I'm going to start with Nick. Being up at CBCC, you've got, you know, right in the middle of the supply chain, you've got people that need to supply to you and your suppliers to others. And we heard before that Josh talked a bit around, you know, making the things that make the things. And so I wanted to ask you about, you know, how you're improving the local supply chain capability, but also some of the challenges that we're facing in this space.
Yeah, so I guess from CBCC's perspective, we're obviously just trying to build capability ourselves. So really buying and acquiring the sort of physical assets, you know, not just the know-how, but the physical process technologies to manufacture some of these other materials and help support the supply chain. Buying more of the logistics infrastructure, the tanks and so on. When we think of the battery industry in particular, though, some of the key challenges is really, you know, all of these materials are very high purity. So, you know, whether it's vanadium, whether it's, you know, iron flow battery electrolyte, or, you know, lithium and HPA, and all of these materials are very high purity. And that creates some logistical challenges that, you know, we've worked to solve. You know, there's no point going to all of this effort to make a really expensive electrolyte and then right at the delivery point you contaminate it, you know. So, you know, so there's a lot of work on the clean logistics, I guess. And then the other gap that we've been working to fill is really around the testing of the materials. So, you know, you want to know that it's to specification before it goes into that battery. So you really need that independent capability to test the materials, because it doesn't matter if it's vanadium electrolyte or iron flow electrolyte or, you know, some other material. You need to be able to test it, and that's something that I think, being an existing manufacturer, we've really struggled with that even before making battery chemicals. And so it's really, we've been looking to partner with people to sort of aggregate the demand for these services, I guess, to try and solve the problem for ourselves as well as everyone else. So, you know, that's something that we're doing at the moment, is working on building a laboratory in Townsville that people can use to, you know, test the materials, and, you know, really basic. But it's hard to do because they are such high purity materials. It's hard to find, like, it's not that labs don't have the equipment, but it's the motivation, the willpower, the know-how, and you tell people what you want them to do, and they're quite happy not to do it because it's hard. So, yeah.
And testing's come up a few times today, so it's very topical. And I think there'll be a lot of people happy to hear that additional facility is getting built as well. Yeah, fantastic. Nagesh, over to you. Tell us a bit around what you see has been required to support more local manufacturing, and particularly, obviously, for battery manufacturing here in Australia.
Yep, from my perspective, actually, we did a study last year and probably early this year, actually, which is looking at battery component supply chain, mainly looking at how businesses actually, what are the challenges and opportunities in battery supply chain in relation to lithium-ion and flow batteries. And one of the things actually which came up quite regularly in those conversations with businesses was testing, need for independent testing facilities. I know Quest Hub in QUT is actually doing a lot of great stuff, but we need more of it in Australia. When it comes to certification, independent certification from qualified certification agencies, we don't have anything here in Australia. So all the battery manufacturers, they have to actually, if they have to produce a commercial scale battery storage devices, they have to send it to overseas, probably in either to Germany or to China to get it properly certified. So I think that is a clear need actually for battery manufacturers here to have actually independent testing facilities. I know LIS Energy and others actually are doing something in this space, but I think we need better testing facilities and more of it in Australia. Yeah.
Thank you. Ursula, you must have a fabulous oversight of all the projects across Queensland with your role. So what are you seeing from a trends perspective around both the level of interest in projects and the investment in some of these developments?
Yeah, no worries. So in SLR Consulting, we're obviously working with all proponents across the entire battery value chain. So we are involved with everything from the resource extraction, material processing, all the way through to the back end. So, EV battery rollouts, grid scale, grid connections, so BESS connections to grid scale, as well as end users, sort of recycling and that circularity. So what we're seeing is that the capital, it's been mentioned quite a lot throughout today's sessions, and again, last year it was a very big theme. A lot of the proponents that we're working with, we're really partnering to support them in de-risking a lot of their PFS and due diligence studies so that they know what they're in for, and there's no surprises when it comes to actually hitting the approvals and permits, because it's a two-phase process. You've got to get your equity partners, you've got to get your funding, but then the next hurdle is obviously approvals and permits. So yeah, we do partner quite closely through that process, and by the time the rubber hits the road and approvals are in place, then we're actually seeing that there's some good going on in the industry. So we've obviously got fantastic precincts and manufacturing hubs similar to Lansdowne Eco-Industrial Precinct. Obviously there's a lot of investment that's going in from Townsville City Council and the state to ensuring that water and sewer and road upgrades are obviously ready and there, so it reduces some risk. But what we are identifying is that there's still much bigger, more strategic, I suppose, network and supply chain considerations that also play into the approvals process, which I'm sure there are many of you that are not unfamiliar with it, those that cited approvals and permits as your biggest frustrations earlier today. But that's things like, Powerlink network locations, the substation areas. There's a lot, we talk about collaboration, there's a lot of users that are going to be relying on this shared infrastructure. So how we're going about supporting proponents to make sure that that happens quickly and seamlessly. And same with major hazard facilities and all the licensing that's associated with it. The approval timeframes are huge, so.
Yeah. No, thank you. And the Lansdowne example is a great one. Nagesh, with infrastructure and logistics, how imperative is that for both our battery manufacturing but also the future of recycling?
Yeah, I think infrastructure-wise, I think when you look at recycling of these minerals, there's a huge space actually that we need to fill. If you consider these batteries actually, whether it's EV or home storage or commercial storage, sooner or later, actually, they will reach the end of life. So probably 5 years away or 10 years away from now. We need to develop reverse logistics infrastructure to actually recycle or reuse these batteries. And not every battery is same. So that means we need to have some sort of mechanism to trace critical minerals so that it can be recircularly recycled and reused, right? So I think the time is now actually to think about how do we develop these reverse logistics infrastructure so that we have plan in place actually for the future so that we get all these materials or batteries in one place for economy of scale to have a better commercial output actually from those recycling facilities. So I think when you look at these lithium-ion or flow batteries or any other battery types, there's no standardized way of actually knowing what goes into those batteries, right? So there's no standardized ways of even recycling. So I think there needs to be some sort of labeling convention as well, more standardized way to actually know what goes inside each of those batteries so that we can automatically automate some of those recycling aspects later on in the future.
Yeah, I imagine COEX scheme on steroids for batteries, all getting down their little automatic chutes. Nick, as we can see in the room today, we've got government, industry and research organisations all wanting this to come to fruition around battery manufacturing. What do you see as being the roles of each of those stakeholders in bringing that dream alive?
Well, I think, the opportunity is already there, and it's really now about focusing on the delivery. So how do we actually make this happen? Like, how do we make the manufacturing happen, and how do we commercialize it? And I think the big problem for us in Australia that people need to get their head around is, well, manufacturing's actually been in decline in this country for a long time. And, why is that? You've got to start to ask these questions. And, obviously access to capital is one. So we've been a chemical manufacturer before it was sexy. And, we still have trouble accessing capital. Like, it's getting easier, but, it's still difficult. But accessing capital isn't actually the biggest problem, because it's actually easy to fix. It's just money, it's very easy to fix that problem. You just supply the money. The next the next biggest problem though is really access to supply chains. And I think people talk about the valley of death and all of this kind of thing, but they don't appreciate that manufacturing's hard. That's the pointy end, and it's really hard in this country. And there's a couple of things that people probably don't think about, and one is the access to the raw materials. So we think in this country we should have this massive strategic advantage because we're the biggest exporter in the world of all of these different minerals. But try and buy them, I think the most public example of this is with gas. And this is the case for everyone. Like, Incitec announced just in the last week that they're closing their Geelong fertilizer manufacturing facility because the inputs are too high. It's cheaper to import the stuff than it is to manufacture it. And you have to ask the question, well, who are we really competing with? Like, if it's cheaper to buy Australian minerals overseas than it is in Australia, then, who are we competing with? You can't exactly blame China for that, So I think from a government policy perspective, we've got to think about, well, how do we give our manufacturers access to the supply chains? And, like, for us as an existing manufacturer, like, I can tell you, like, we make aluminium chemicals, and the feedstock that we buy comes from Gladstone, and the delivered price is at parity with getting that from Western Australia. So, like, it's, I don't know how we do that, So
They're good examples, yeah.
So I think either we need to incentivize these big producers to support the domestic market, or we need to force them somehow. But you can't just keep funding them without supporting a domestic industry too.
Yeah. So we got a takeaway there. It can have all the money, but we still got to have something we can actually buy and at a competitive price. So bring us home, Ursula, and then it's time for afternoon tea. So I guess just following on from that to finish up, what policy or other government support do you see as really most benefiting the planning process for these types of developments? And we've heard quite a bit of discussion about what could happen today.
Absolutely. Well, I'll keep it quick because I'm mindful it's afternoon tea, 3:30, everyone's just ready to kind of get out of here and maybe have a bit of a break. But I will lighten the tone. So I've been watching 1883 recently. I don't know if anyone's seen Yellowstone, but it's the prequel to that. Bit of pioneering spirit. And I do actually think that everyone in this audience and the membership of AMBC are at the frontier. They're truly a trailblazing, pioneering group of people who are really looking to start something relatively new in Australia. I know there's been some cited as being, 40 years young in terms of technology, but truly there is a lot of technology now that's very new. And the bicycle analogy that Lee referenced earlier, that's a great example that we're starting to break some of that frontier in the Valley of Death. Well, I'd like to switch everyone's attention to the fact that on these kind of pioneering journeys, you've got to maintain a spirit of grit and look for that oasis. At the end of the day, that's what we're really striving for. So from my perspective, in terms of policy and how regulators and the framework can potentially be sort of enhanced to improve supply chains, in a former life, my role was cutting red tape and looking at streamlining processes. So I do believe that continuing on the journey of looking at hubs and co-locating, common user facilities and looking at infrastructure in a shared sense is going to, eliminate some of the delays that are currently taking place. But also, setting up, whether it's special regulatory bodies or standardisation in framework or streamlining of some of these processes that seem to be waterfall and never ending. You get through one hurdle and then there's another permit that's required. I think there's quite a lot of opportunity in Queensland, particularly because we've got a great development assessment framework and the OCGs also has been referenced. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really strip back and have a look at each aspect of the battery value chain and advanced materials production and look at, well, how can we actually strip out some of the fat and really look at encouraging getting that supply to market quicker. So I'm looking at the oasis and the pioneers ahead of us.
I love it. All right, thank our panellists, please.